Hi there. Watching on YouTube and Facebook Live. Today we have been discussing globalization, history of globalization and global market for the past 3 or 4 weeks, and we started our journey with ancient globalization, and we talked about the life of Alexander the Great, why people call him great. Then we talk about wars in the Middle Ages, overview of the wars. Then we discussed Viking raiders and Mongolian Empire. It's the fourth episode of globalization and history of globalization. And today we are going to discuss uh, globalization before the Industrial Revolution, Renaissance, and Reformation period. The Fugger family, Medici family, the colonialism, and Ed is going to help me to connect the dots among all of them. And my guest is Edward Konowitz.
Hi,
Hi
everybody.
Ed,
How are
how
you?
are you, Ed?
A little cold, but otherwise okay.
Oh, you look good. I like your shirt.
Yeah, I thought I would add some color.
Yes,
Winter's
you
very
should.
gray.
Yes. And okay, uh, where should we start? The
Well, I think we
Renaissance
should
period.
summarize. I mean,
Hmm.
basically, we
Hmm.
began history with the Persian or Middle East empires, Babylon and Egypt,
Hmm.
which were largely land-based. It basically
Hmm.
was a city-state, whether it was Babylon or Memphis or Thebes,
Hmm.
extending their language and control from a central position with armies.
Hmm.
And that usually is hidden because those armies had chariots. And if
Hmm.
they had chariots, they had wagons.
Hmm.
And we don't hear about the wagons. I mean, if
Hmm.
you can make a cart with two wheels, you certainly can make a cart with four wheels to carry your supplies. But you
Hmm.
don't take a wagon or a
Hmm.
chariot through a desert. You don't
Hmm.
take a rat wagon or a chariot through a forest. You need a road.
Hmm. Yes.
So, though we hear about the Romans having roads, this must have been a high priority to the Egyptians and to the Persians and Babylonians.
Hmm.
So, road building is not something new. We don't know how old the Silk Road was, but the empire, and that's even today, if you go into the United States or most countries, the big government builds the interstates and the roads.
Hmm.
And of course, there was a period where it was railroads that was more important. But
Hmm.
what I want to discuss is the history of globalization. So,
Okay.
globalization was first built on the city state, and we see that very clearly with the Greeks. And the reason was in one city, you had a common language.
Hmm.
In order to trade, you had an expansion of that language. And we see the ancient Egyptian empire really disappeared. We don't have hieroglyphics or the remains of ancient Egyptian language around much.
Hmm.
We do have some of the Persian, Arabic, and Roman and Greek languages around. But let's
Hmm.
sort of summarize the beginning that we see in the West of globalization was Alexander the Great, about
Hmm.
300 BC. And part of his globalization was creating universities, like at the
Hmm.
Library of Alexandria. And
Hmm.
then that split apart, it couldn't be held together. And partially it's tribalism or village life, and there's a tension between a universal language and the local language, which we're going to get to because we're headed towards the Renaissance. But I want to kind
Hmm.
of review.
Okay.
So around 300 BC, we have the rise of the Greek Empire, and then right around the switch 0 BC AD, we have the growing Roman Empire. Rome was initially like a colony of Greece.
mhm,
And Rome basically rebelled and became the center of the Mediterranean Empire, particularly after defeating the Phoenicians and Carthage. So
mhm,
globalization first in our history, not in China history, but there's basically, you know, three, four empires. There's the Chinese, the Mediterranean empires, the Aztec North American Empire, and other Mexican empires, and the South American Incas and Central American Mayas or Mayans.
mhm.
But we're concentrating sort of on the Eurasia and Northern Africa. So
Okay.
the first movement towards globalization by the Greeks and the Romans was control of the Mediterranean trade, which was
Mhm,
largely based on Egypt. But
mhm,
people don't know why. There's two products, and we're going to take it into the Renaissance.
mhm,
There's two products. There's one, textiles, which is clothing, and of course linen was a major product of Egypt. And then we have wool, which is more Central Europe, and then we have cotton from India,
mhm.
and cotton was in the Aztecs and the North American Indian empires.
The
And
spices.
the second thing that was underlying globalization besides textiles
Mhm,
was drugs,
mhm,
particularly wine, beer, and opium. Opium is hidden. Opium is
mhm.
probably the largest trading commodity in history. Even today, you can hear about the opioid epidemics and COVID 19, and patients are given opioids.
Yes.
So, one of the underlying hidden, you can find it. I mean, you
Mhm,
can do a search in Google and find the influence of opium, but it was a major thing. And we're going to look at the Medici family, which is the Renaissance, and but let's work our way up to it. So the Roman Empire around the time of Jesus Christ, from about 50 BC to about 200 AD, about 300 years,
mhm,
controlled the Mediterranean, and particularly with defeating the Phoenicians or the Semitic peoples.
mhm,
And Carthage was part of the Phoenician Empire,
mhm,
and Rome defeated Carthage. Now, the interesting claim, and most
mhm,
historians accept that the Romans felt that the Carthaginians sacrificed their own children, that they
mhm.
killed, and the Phoenicians killed their own children to Baal. And this is sort of a reference of Abraham that he didn't actually have to kill his son Isaac,
Mhm.
where the Romans accused the Semitic people, particularly the Phoenicians, of killing their own children as a sacrifice to the gods. So we have the domination of the Romans until about 300 AD, where the Roman Empire split into the Greek or Byzantium, based
Mhm.
on Emperor Constantine, and moved towards Turkey and Istanbul or Constantinople. And it split into East and West, the West being the Latin Empire, which eventually became Germanic under Charlemagne, which was the Romans and Latins couldn't defend themselves from the northern barbarians and barbarians from the Asian steppes, so relied
Mhm.
on the Franks. The Romans initially defeated the Gauls, which were the same as the Celtics, but the Roman Empire began falling apart, and it split into
Mhm.
two, and really ended with the Fourth Crusade, in which the sponsored by the Venetians from Venice in Italy. And this was sort of the beginning of the rise
Mhm.
of nationalism again. which is the
Mhm.
empires were pretty much over with. As the Roman Empire shrunk, the Mongolian Empire and the Viking Empire took up
Yep.
the space of the shrinking Roman Empire. Now, the Viking Empire, we're told, was only a couple hundred years. It's not true. A lot of
Mhm.
what we're told in history is not true. The Viking Empire split, and this is, I actually think there's three factors underlying globalization. One is
So what are the?
textiles,
Mhm.
the other one is drugs, particularly opium and wine. They were
Mhm.
major exports and imports. And a lot of
Mhm.
people associate opium with China, and it's not true. Opium was
Mhm.
grown in India, Persia, and especially Egypt. It was a very
Mhm.
important crop of Egypt. And people
Mhm.
used to drink it, they used to make a concoction of that. And
Mhm.
we're headed towards the age of exploration, and part of that was, if you read about the English being funded to go to North America, the East Indian Company, one of their
Mhm.
major products was tobacco. But you
Mhm.
needed tobacco to mix with opium because opium was too sour or
Addictive.
basic. No,
Addictive.
it wasn't because it was too addictive. It was
Mhm.
too hard to take directly. So you had to
Mhm.
mix it with something. So
Mhm.
tobacco was the product of choice to mix opium. So you would mix opium and tobacco, not you, but
Mhm.
and this is to a large extent the basis of the English Empire was the opium trade.
Mhm.
But we want to get to we're not yet at the English Empire. Where we're at is
Is
the
the Viking?
Renaissance, which is
Mhm.
the Viking Empire and the Mongolian Empire um, crashed. The Mongolian Empire crashed, and basically China took over much of the territory. But the
Mhm.
Viking Empire split. It split into Russia,
Mhm.
split into the Normans, which conquered England. So
Mhm.
the Vikings really are the origin of the modern West, because the Vikings,
Mhm.
particularly the Normans in France, who were Vikings,
Mhm.
basically landed and controlled much of England. That's the
The
William the
Russians,
Conqueror,
The Russians are
1066.
also the Russians are also.
Yeah, the Russians also from Kiev and then the Moscow. The Rus or the
Mhm.
Russians meant Vikings.
Mhm.
And even the Eastern um, Empire, Roman Empire at Byzantium or Constantinople, used Vikings. Vikings
Mhm.
were their mercenaries. And
Paid
the
mercenaries.
Vikings in Turkey were called Varangians.
Mhm.
So they just changed their names. The Vikings in Italy, which were used as mercenaries, were
The
called the
Venetians.
Lombard.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay, like a lumber.
Lombard, Bard, Barbarossa meant beard. Lum
Mhm.
meant long beards, and the Vikings had long beards, but they were very um, kept up or very maintained. The Vikings did not look like barbarians. They were very much concerned with their appearance. So we
Mhm.
have the Vikings split up into the Normans, which influenced France and conquered England in
Mhm.
1066, which is right in the middle of the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages were from 500, when the Roman Empire collapsed, to 1500. And right around 1500, around 1300, began the Renaissance and the rise of countries like England and Germany, which was the Holy Roman Empire consolidating more up north in Germany. But
Mhm.
the issue, I think, in globalization here as we approach the Renaissance, so we're going from the Egyptian Empire, Persian Empire, Greek Empire, Roman Empire. The Roman Empire splits. The Vikings extend their empire. The
The
Mongols
Mongolian.
extend their empire. The Mongolian Empire collapses into just China. I sent
Mm-hmm.
you the documentary. China tries to send ships out and does, but it's too expensive. China
Mm-hmm.
decides against international trade. China makes a decision soon after the Mongolian Empire collapsed to maintain an empire based on an army, based
Mm-hmm.
on based on a central position, which was opposite to Europe. Europe
Mm-hmm.
with the Vikings were based on ships,
They
and
decided
as
to expand their empire.
based on navies,
Yes.
which was Europe already was based on navies controlling the Mediterranean. So what we have with the Renaissance is the movement to go to international trade, the age of exploration. And at this
Mm-hmm.
point, the empire changed because of three major products. I didn't mention the third one.
Okay.
The first major product was textiles. Could be cotton from India, it could be silk from China, it could be wool from Germany, it could be
Or
linen from
spices.
Egypt, and
Mm-hmm.
spices. But spices
Yes.
were often drugs. It was usually opium and tobacco
Yes.
from North America. So
So,
and wine.
when the historian talk about spices, it actually means the drugs, opium, or beer, wine.
Yeah,
That sort of.
really though there was spices. I mean there was oregano and cinnamon. Though there was
Okay.
spices, the
Those.
real money was in the opium and wine, which we even see today.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, history doesn't emphasize that. You read the historians, you have to go on your own and look up the history of opium and wine.
Yes.
And then you'll find that it was a major characteristic. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, the Medici family, the wealthiest family in Europe, and the beginning of banking, they really were the beginning of banking. They
Yes.
had a whole closet in their house filled with opium.
So I think they started it not in 1497 or 93.
Of the Medici family,
Yeah, they're first from 1397 to 1497 or 93. That was around with 100 period
yeah,
up.
yeah, about 100 years, but they
Yes.
represented a decentralization mode in which I want to sort of explain.
Mm-hmm.
What I remember, I said three basic products, or three
Mm-hmm.
basic underlying things to the globalization. Textiles, we see that in India and England. And then we
Spices.
have spices, which includes drugs like opium and wine and beer.
Mm-hmm.
And beer was usually made locally, but I'll get
There's
into beer later.
there's also one more thing I would like to add is mining.
I didn't catch that. Interference.
Mining. Mining.
Mining, yes.
Yes.
Mining was there particularly for tin and gold and
Mhm.
silver.
Yes.
But and
Copper was
but
also copper.
mining wasn't the basis initially of trade because it
Yes.
was hard to carry ores or metals a long distance.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have railroads or trucks.
Yes.
So the Romans conquered particularly Spain and Portugal for mining reasons. And then
Mm-hmm.
that's what drove them into England because England has such good mining. And England was where the Industrial Revolution began because they had the mines, the coal
Yes.
mines, the iron mines, the tin mines. So mining was, except for gold and silver, which is called bullion,
Mm-hmm.
um, mining was more of an issue for the bankers.
Mm-hmm.
The average person wasn't going to be involved in the mining trade, but the average
Mm-hmm.
person was going to be involved with clothing and with wine and opium. So yes, mining was the third part. I
Yes.
mean, we could list 100 products.
Yes.
The same textiles, spices, and drugs, including alcohol. The third
Mining.
part is that is ignored is professional soldiers.
Yes.
So basically, an empire like the Roman Empire or the Mongolian, they were always fighting and
Mm-hmm.
pillaging, stealing. But once we get to the Renaissance, we are approaching boundaries of countries,
Mm-hmm.
and a country could not afford to have a standing army. So you had
Mm-hmm.
mercenaries or professional soldiers. This happened to Rome. Rome started to use the Huns and the Visigoths and others as mercenaries. The Vikings were used as mercenaries. China used the Mongols before the Mongol Empire, and after the Mongol Empire, China used Mongols for their armies.
Yes.
So
Just like.
a major part of history is the professional soldier. And if they're
Mhm.
not employed, what do you do? In the Dark Ages, they sent them on crusades and they had to
Yes.
steal because
Mm-hmm.
it was expensive. They had to pay for their ships, they had to pay for their armor. And I think this is my thesis
Okay.
that the professional armies began the secret societies like Masonry.
Mm-hmm.
And being in an army like in Alexander the Great's armies, they had to make siege equipment, they had to make bridges, which is the soldiers were trained in engineering. So the guilds of Europe, the building guilds and the blacksmiths and the stonemasons, they were very directly related to soldiers and professional mercenaries. And this sort of became the lodges and the powerhouse because these were the soldiers and they
Mm-hmm.
were somewhat independent of the state. They started to form guilds. And this is hidden. It's like the major part of the American Revolution was done by Masons who
Mm-hmm.
were in control soldiers like George Washington. And this
Mm-hmm.
is hidden from history. It's very difficult to find the influence of secret fraternal orders and why they were dominating government. And they were dominating government because they were professional soldiers, like the
Yes.
Hospitalians.
Mm-hmm.
And so they
Yes.
began an independent hierarchy. The
Mm-hmm.
independent hierarchy, now we're into the Renaissance,
Mm-hmm.
was banking. So the Medici family was probably part of a secret society, like Queen Elizabeth is. They were
Mm-hmm.
part of a secret order of professional soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
And this had played a major role, particularly initially in the Crusades. And Venice and Florence, the Medici family was from Florence. And of course, Venice, the major product there was salt. And salt was one of the important, particularly before the Renaissance, salt was a dominant trade in the Mediterranean. And
Yes.
Venice became very influential, an empire, because they had salt, basically factories. They would spread the seawater out and on like swampy land and dry it and get salt. So
Mm-hmm.
the salt trade was really significant. But we want to get to the Renaissance and colonization, which is we moved from control of the Mediterranean and the Silk Road, the roads.
Mm-hmm.
The Mongol Empire was about controlling the Silk Road and trade.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Alexander the Great went to. The Greeks already were in control of the Mediterranean Sea, and now Alexander the Great took the naval dominance and tried to bring that to India, to be able to trade with Persia and India. And of course, the Persia and Indian area was opium. And I think Alexander the Great was an opium addict. I think he was
Mhm.
totally crazy. And if you look at him taking most of his men across the desert from India, he killed like 2/3 of his men. His own men he killed.
Mhm.
And I think
I think
because I think he was crazy. I think he was an opium addict.
yeah, it's highly probable.
So we're dealing with two hidden factors: opium and secret societies based on engineering, based on
Mhm.
the armies,
Profession.
because the
Yes.
armies had to build bridges, they had to build
Mhm.
siege equipment. China
Mhm.
developed gunpowder. That was the reason why the Mongols could conquer all the way to Kiev. They had explosives. And this is hidden from history.
Mhm.
And China kept explosives, gunpowder, secret for 500 years. It also kept china or porcelain dishes secret for 1,000 years.
Mhm.
So a lot of the products and trades were secretive. We even say trades, trades
Mhm.
being the guilds and the secret organizations like the Knights Templar, the Masons, the Hospitaliers, the Red
Mhm.
Cross. These were secret
Mhm.
societies and they were based on the engineering skills of armies.
And
So they had
also
great
the
engineering.
masonry, and also the skill of masonry.
Yeah, the skill of mercenaries. And the Vikings had this skill, and the
No,
Vikings continued.
I meant masonry, the building, the architect,
Oh, yeah,
the
masonry.
engine. Yes,
Yeah,
the
masonry.
pyramid.
They had the skill of building.
Yes,
And so they weren't totally able to be controlled by the emperor or king.
yes.
So what arose is these banking families. And these banking families and companies, like the East Indian Company, which came after the Age of Exploration or during it, had more
Mm-hmm.
troops than England. The East Indian
Mm-hmm.
Company had 150,000 mercenaries.
Mm-hmm.
And so these companies catered to the secret societies, and this was the basis of trade. And why the Medici family is so significant, which is during the Renaissance, is they issued currency. As
Mm-hmm.
bankers, they had gold and silver reserves and issued paper notes or cotton notes. Of course, paper money in the United States is really made of cotton. So
Mm-hmm.
they issued these notes, and the increase of currency, which is away from coinage, was real
Mm-hmm.
important for creating jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a theme that was kept kind of secret, was paper money was important in order to have engineering because you had to pay people. And it was
Mm-hmm.
too hard to pass around a lot of gold and silver. So we
So
see
they
in the
decided.
Renaissance with the Medici family the rise of currency, which is a major point in globalization. What's going to be your currency?
Mm-hmm.
So that's even an issue today with credit cards and cryptocurrencies.
Mm-hmm.
Globalization is based upon a large base of currency, and that's what the Medici family during the Renaissance did. And to build their credit, which is they had to be reliable, they sponsored
Mm-hmm.
artists, Leonardo da
Yes.
Vinci, Michelangelo, and they made these guys into celebrities. Now, I want to
Mm-hmm.
refer to Rembrandt, who came a little bit later. And the reason
So
is
so
we have to,
it's highly probable that they use the talent of those geniuses, and they were working their agenda, they were pushing their agenda in the background.
yes, they were the modern philanthropists.
Yes.
And I think, I mean, we're dealing with thousands of hours of study,
Yes,
and I'm trying to summarize it.
yes, it's
And
we are just there's thousands, hundreds of years of history, and it's very difficult to cover everything in around about 1 hour of video. But we do whatever we can.
right. So, but I want to sort of, so summary is really important, but we're going to
Yes,
leave out a lot of stuff. So,
yes,
what I'm saying is, you have the old empires, the Egyptian, the Persian, the Roman. They
mm-hmm,
split, they couldn't
mm-hmm,
sustain them. Initially, the European empires were based on control of the Mediterranean trade, and then there was the issue of the Silk trade,
mm-hmm.
and the empires kept falling apart because of the move towards what we call today nationalism, which
Yes,
is different languages. And
mm-hmm,
as these empires were falling apart during the Renaissance, these banking families like the Fuggers in
mm-hmm,
Germany or the Medici in Italy arose. And I'm
yes,
saying they arose from the secret societies, which were the professional soldiers, which
mm-hmm,
is the professional soldiers had the engineering and the masonry skills to build buildings and bridges and maintain them. Of course,
yes,
basically, these large armies of 30,000 people would have to move and supplies and logistics, and they became the secret societies, which were
mm-hmm,
the mercenaries. And a
mm-hmm,
lot of them did not have allegiance really to the king or to the pope. So there was a split in the hierarchy,
mm-hmm,
which began in what's called the mercantilist class. And I'm
mm-hmm,
claiming, because you're not going to find this in the books, the
mm-hmm,
mercantilist class arose from the secret societies of soldiers.
mm-hmm.
And we see this secrecy with the Eastern Roman Empire, which was Greek, and it never died. It moved north. The
So
Orthodox Church, which is the
mhm,
Russian Orthodox Church, moved to Russia.
mhm. So
And
it's also possible that those secret societies they were they were hired by the Medici family or the banks or the wealthiest people, since they didn't have any allegiance to the Pope or to the King. So they were also the secret societies. They were paid mercenaries, in other
yeah, the
words.
mercenaries had the engineering skills,
Yes.
particularly the
So they
Vikings. With the see the Greek Catholic Church,
mhm,
really established right after Emperor Constantine in Istanbul, used
mhm,
Vikings
mhm,
mercenaries to protect themselves. They were called the Varangian Guards. So
mhm,
this Russian or Viking element moved the Greek Orthodox Church from Turkey to to
to
Moscow.
uh-huh,
Basically, the Eastern Empire moved to Russia via the Vikings and via secret orders of soldiers and mercenaries. And today, Russia is still a military power. And you
yes.
can't in Russia speak against the military.
Mhm,
You want to talk about the worship of the military. This is
mhm,
a very powerful theme in Russian culture.
mhm,
So the Vikings split into East and West. The West was England,
mhm,
which we see in the Norman conquest in 1066 by William of Orange of England.
mhm,
So 1 out of 30 people in Britain are descendants of Vikings, 1 out of 30.
mhm.
And then we see the secondary split, which was to Russia based on Kiev. And these were based on basically warriors or soldiers. And these
Mhm.
warriors and soldiers, is my opinion, formed the secret societies.
Okay.
And this was even true during the Romans. The
I
Roman
think.
legions had mystery cults. The Roman legions formed secret societies.
Mhm. So I think we
And
should now focus on the Renaissance period,
yeah,
the Medici
well,
family, the Fugger family, and the colonialism, because
okay,
I can sense a connection among all of them. So what do you
yeah,
think?
yes, I want to cover Rembrandt.
Okay.
Rembrandt's in the later part of the Renaissance, about mid 1600s.
Mm-hmm.
And we think of Rembrandt as a great painter, and
Mm-hmm.
that's true. I'm not trying to discredit him, but he was a business.
Mm-hmm.
He did not paint all his paintings, even the ones he signed.
Mm-hmm.
He was a large business enterprise,
Mm-hmm.
sort of like celebrities today. Um,
Mm-hmm.
he was a factory,
Mm-hmm.
and he had a lot of students. At one time, 1,000 paintings were
Mm-hmm.
attributed to Rembrandt.
Mm-hmm.
60% now are considered forgeries.
Mm-hmm.
So 600 out of 1,000 paintings were forgeries with his name on it. Well, he employed a lot of his apprentices or students. He had
Mm-hmm.
basically a factory.
Mm-hmm.
And if one of his students did a painting he approved of, he
He,
signed the
he,
painting.
okay.
So we have three issues. We have the
So what are the?
forgeries that were not
Mm-hmm.
signed by him. They were made by someone else because
Mm-hmm.
they were so expensive. And you can tell
Mm-hmm.
the difference because of the expertise of Rembrandt.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the paintings that were signed by him, but some of
They
the
were
paintings
expensive.
he signed, he didn't he didn't do. It was his students. And if his
Mm-hmm.
students did a high quality painting that he approved of, he signed it. He was a businessman. And by
Mm-hmm.
signing the painting, it could get more money. They could
Yeah.
sell it for more. And then we have the
Mm-hmm.
original paintings that he at least supervised. I mean, you see
Mm-hmm.
some Rembrandt paintings, they're the size of a wall. They're huge.
Mm-hmm.
They're like 15 feet by 15 feet. They're
Mm-hmm.
huge paintings. So Rembrandt was more a trademark.
Mm-hmm.
You have a trademark, you buy certain type of furniture or you buy certain type of clothing and you have a
Just like
trademark name.
just like businesses, Walmart, Amazon, the companies, the big companies.
Yeah,
Uh,
like IKEA, like
yes,
IKEA furniture.
yes.
So when we think of Rembrandt, we need to think of the Rembrandt painting business
Mm-hmm.
because we don't know how many of the paintings and how much of the paintings he really did. He
Mm-hmm.
was a skilled craftsman, one of the greatest painters that ever lived, but it was the trademark.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was the same thing with Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. I don't think they did all their work themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think they were a company, a business.
Mm-hmm.
And so, where does a business get funded from? Where they get their loans from banks. So,
Mm-hmm.
the Medici family was the bank of the Leonardo da Vinci business and the Michelangelo business. They were contractors. That's
Mm-hmm.
my opinion. But
Okay.
there is a lot of evidence to present that opinion because these secret societies are covering up the connections. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
reasons why they're covering up the connections, and you see that today with artists, you
Mm-hmm.
see that with Hollywood, drugs, opium, cocaine play a major role, and they keep that hidden.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're looking at the Medici family, to some extent, we're seeing organized crime with secretive
So
drug trades. companies posing as one person like Rembrandt. Rembrandt was
Mhm.
not one painter, he was a business.
Mhm. It was a
And
brand.
it was a brand,
Mhm.
with some of them having the official signature, some of them
Mhm.
having uh, a fraudulent signature that others imitated.
Mhm.
And even those products that he signed were some of them were done by his pupils,
Mhm.
by his students, by his company.
Mhm.
And he, though owning a lot like Thomas Jefferson, went bankrupt.
Mhm.
And I think that's because the bankers were really in control, like the Medici family and Fuggers or
Mhm.
Fugers. The
Okay. Cougar.
these
Cougar is
banking
good.
families were the center of control, and we see that happen in Europe.
Mhm.
Hitler's concentration camps were funded by the Swiss banks.
Mhm.
So we have the rise of secret societies and banking.
Mhm.
And the
In
secret
the
societies were based upon mercenaries or soldiers that had great engineering skill, like Michelangelo and
and
Leonardo da Vinci. They both were great engineers,
yes.
but they didn't learn it totally on their own. I don't think any of us learn totally on our own. We're given
Yeah.
the
It.
propaganda that
Mhm.
Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo learned all their immense skills on their own. I don't believe that.
Mhm.
I
Okay.
believe they were
Because.
members of guilds and secret
Mhm.
societies that were underground schools.
Mhm. It's highly probable
It is highly probable. And so
because
what we're
you said.
seeing is the rise of secret societies in Western civilization controlling politics, where
So.
the king is no longer in control.
Mhm. So, if they, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, if secret society was funding their, financing their education, and they had secret schools, they were working in the background. So, what's the point of presenting them as geniuses that they learned everything by their own and not promoting their schools?
Well, it's an interesting thing. We talked like 3 or 4 videos ago about credit or credibility, which is
Yes,
control of currency is who has credibility. And so
yes.
by bringing up Einstein's, by bringing up Leonardo da Vinci's, they create a center of credibility in the public's mind. And then by the Medici family and philanthropists supporting the scholars, they look like good guys like the Rockefeller family
Mhm,
supporting, you know, Chicago University or University of Chicago.
mhm,
So these mercantilists support scholars in order to build
mhm.
their own credibility so they don't look like organized crime.
Okay.
So credibility became a big issue. And why did it become a big issue? Because of the printing press.
Mhm.
Let me get the date of the printing press. So I'm trying to give people a
Mm,
different perspective and interpretation because they can read Wikipedia
mhm.
and
Yeah, the mainstream history.
they can get it. See, Gutenberg was around 1400 who
Mhm,
developed the printing press. So
mhm,
1500 began the Renaissance. And the
mhm,
reason is credibility or news could be printed on a piece of paper, a pamphlet. This was even Martin Luther's thesis with the Protestant Reformation. News could spread quickly, and it was important now to have celebrities or famous geniuses like
mhm,
Einstein or business geniuses, supposedly like Bill Gates.
mhm,
And these were to influence politics more than the kings.
mhm,
Bill Gates is going to be there and Trump is going to be gone.
mhm.
let's say
Yes.
Biden's the next president, he's going to be gone, but who's going to stay there supposedly as a philanthropist and
Is
genius? Is Bill Gates. So
and
we're seeing
also
this in the
Mark
Renaissance.
Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg, right. What we're seeing,
Mm,
or what was the guy with the Tesla and the
yeah.
yeah, who let me get his name. Now the wealthiest person, who's the wealthiest person in the world supposedly?
Is Bill Gates.
No, Elon Musk.
Yes, Elon Musk. Yes, I
So
got it.
Elon Musk is another Leonardo da Vinci.
Yes.
And the reason is human consciousness is real important. What do people believe in? Because the earlier empires were based on religion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why Alexander the Great
Mm-hmm.
was called the Great, because this globalization was supposed to be based on so called geniuses. Geniuses
Is
like Aristotle, Leonardo
mm-hmm.
da Vinci, Michelangelo, Rembrandt.
Mm-hmm.
So their brands, their names, their trademarks created to give credibility to the banking.
Mm-hmm.
And the banking, like the Medici family, are sponsoring the celebrities like Einstein, like Isaac Newton,
Mm-hmm.
like um, Leonardo da Vinci. So it is the rise of credibility or reputation.
Mm-hmm.
And even the kings and queens try to give awards and knight people in order to be partaking of the credibility that was created for these geniuses. And we have to question, like Rembrandt, were these geniuses or a company or a member of a guild, a
Mm-hmm.
secretive guild. And of course, we see that in the American Revolution,
Mm-hmm.
where
So,
Masonry was a major role. And this is during right after, it's at the same time, basically.
mhm.
15 to 1700 is part of the Renaissance. Now, the Renaissance is misnamed.
So there's one thing, there's one more factor there. The Fugger family and the Spanish involvement, uh, uh, the exile and the exile, the exact word, or they kick out all the Jews.
Yes, there's another thing, which is in consolidation of nationalism.
Hmm.
Those people who do not identify with the nation state, such as Jews, were kicked out. I mean, that
Yes.
led to the age of colonization, because the day Spain kicked out the Jews, the
Hmm.
Columbus's crewmen boarded the ships,
Hmm.
which has to do with an escape valve. Where were Jews going to go? They were going to go to, quote, the New World.
Hmm.
So they were forced out of, after the Moors or Islamic armies were pushed out of Spain and Portugal.
Hmm.
The next was the Jews were pushed out to consolidate based on religion.
Hmm.
So 1492 and 1500s, the initial part of the Renaissance, was still trying to consolidate in terms of religion, but that fell apart. Started to
Hmm.
fall apart with Martin Luther. It started to fall apart with the banking interest. Though the banking interest, like the Medici family and Fuggers in
Hmm.
Germany, they built churches,
Hmm.
which was the
And
banking families were another form of taxing the public. The
they were
Catholic Church
also
no
financing.
longer
They
taxed
were
the
also
public.
financing the art, the
Yeah,
paintings. They were also financing it.
yeah, I'm putting them in the churches, the
Mm-hmm.
sculptures and the architect.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I think we have to see globalization as mind control. And it
Mm-hmm.
went first to religion, and then it
Mm-hmm.
went to celebrity geniuses. It went to
Mm-hmm.
people like Leonardo da Vinci and Rembrandt and see who else was that?
Michelangelo. Michelangelo.
Michelangelo. There's some other people in history. So the Renaissance, the name really meant rebirth of classical literature. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not true. It wasn't a rebirth of Rome or Greek. They did do some scholarship and gathered books from monasteries of the Greek and Roman authors.
Mm-hmm.
And they promoted philosophy.
So
But
what I
it was not a rebirth of Greek and Roman.
Mhm,
It was the beginning of nationalism, the reduction of religion as mind control, and it used
mhm.
to be called the humanities. It was beginning of emphasizing the university and study.
So what I gathered from our discussion so far, that the businesses, the wealthy people, they they understood one thing, that the religion is not the answer. The belief and the kings, they are not the answer. So they started. They built institutions like banks, and they funded uh, 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 the celebrities like Rembrandt, Michelangelo, and Leonardo da Vinci.
Yeah, we have
To
to see. I think we need to see Leonardo da Vinci, and
Mhm,
Michelangelo, like Elon Musk. And
mhm,
Elon Musk is now considered the wealthiest person in the world,
mhm,
wealthier than Bill Gates.
mhm,
And how is that?
mhm,
How many people buy a Tesla?
mhm.
How many people
Yeah.
have an operating system?
Mhm,
So what we're dealing with is secret societies that are creating celebrities.
mhm.
Elon Musk
So
is a celebrity.
What I meant was that they presented those celebrities like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Rembrandt to show the people, but they in the background they were establishing their own secret societies.
Yes,
Hmm.
that's where the guilds of engineers, the guilds of stonemasons, the guilds of plumbers, the
Hmm.
guilds of blacksmiths.
Hmm.
They were trying to monopolize the technology,
Hmm.
and they had power frequently
Hmm.
equal or greater than the Pope.
Hmm.
In fact, members of the Medici family became popes.
Hmm.
But it was decided the Renaissance was the beginning of the mind control moving from religion
Hmm.
to the university, using
Hmm.
celebrities like Einstein, Michelangelo,
Hmm.
and Leonardo da Vinci. So
Hmm.
celebrities like um, Martin Luther were created and
There's
funded.
there's yeah, there's one thing I would like to add, that those banks and Medici families and Fugger family, they were we see that in the early they were working with the religion, with the church, and but they realized later on that church is also not the answer.
They couldn't do the full mind control. They
Yes.
needed quote science
Hmm.
to do the mind control.
Hmm.
And we see that today with Soros and the Rothschilds, these
Hmm.
huge foundations, the Rockefellers, they sponsor scholarships and they sponsor the university in order to use science for mind control, because
Hmm.
religion. And that began in the Renaissance.
I
And
think
then the next step, these
there's
soldiers
one.
recognized they didn't want to be
Mhm,
fighting each other.
mhm,
They didn't want Italy fighting Germany or Germany fighting France. It was going to be too
mhm,
much bloodshed. So
mhm,
this was the age of colonization, where the guilds of soldiers and engineers could go across the Atlantic or into Africa and
mhm,
conquer small tribes that did not have the technology, that did not have guns, that did not have cannon,
mhm, Mhm.
that did not have the building capabilities.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it was decided. So as we get to these banking interests, which were really secret societies,
Mhm.
funding these celebrities that represented engineering, that represented art, that represented music, such as
Mhm.
Mozart and Beethoven, that
Yes.
it would be easier to pick on and conquer less developed nations. So now we have colonization, where England goes over to North America, Spain and Portugal go over to Central America and South America, and of course,
Mhm.
Germany and Belgium and France. They go into Africa. They go into
Yes.
Africa with their superior technology, like
Mhm.
Alexander the Great. So that's why Alexander the Great was seen as the beginning of globalization and is called great because he had
Mhm.
superior engineering. And
Mhm.
his superior
So,
engineering, like the gunpowder of China, was kept secret. They needed to keep their engineering secret because it was used for war.
mhm.
And you're not going to
So
read that in regular history. And
Mhm.
part of this was drugging people. Mind
Mhm.
control was not only done through science and religion, it's also done through drugs, particularly opium. So,
Mhm.
opium has been a major product. When the
Mhm.
American revolutionaries at the end of the Renaissance, 1700s, 1800s, is the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which we'll cover next.
Mhm.
When they threw the tea over the Boston Tea Party, it was probably opium in those cases. The
Mhm.
British were trying to impose opium addiction on China. China was fighting them and lost. In fact, the
Mhm.
first Opium War, the British won and they got Hong Kong. Hong
Mhm.
Kong, British colony, was part of winning the Opium War, which was forcing China into the opium trade. And
Mhm.
I think Britain was going to force the American people into opium with tobacco.
Mhm.
And the Boston Tea Party was dumping the opium into the water. It was called
Mhm.
the Tea Party because it's secret. It's a secret how
Mhm.
much. Go look. Anyone listening, do a search on opium in history,
Mhm.
and you will see it's a major part of the trade, going all the way back to the Egyptians.
Mhm.
So we're dealing with organized crime, the secret Greek societies that are distributing opium, and now it's being done by doctors. The
Mhm.
doctors are the
So,
big opium drug pushers.
the colonial empire, the colonists, they were also those people were also mind controlled. They were taught that they are they are better. They have the superior intellect
Right,
than the
superior
people who
engineering.
are. Yes. Uh,
Washington
so.
was a canal engineer.
Mhm.
Jefferson was an architect and
Mhm.
civil engineer to some extent. Many of the American revolutionaries were just like Alexander the Great, very skilled
Mhm.
in engineering,
Mhm.
and they belonged to guilds. They belonged to secret guilds,
Mhm.
but they were still going bankrupt.
Mhm.
Thomas Jefferson went bankrupt.
Mhm.
So did Rembrandt
Mhm.
because they were being controlled by bankers.
Mhm.
And people
So
don't
there's
know Jefferson was basically being controlled by bankers.
there was one thing I would like to I want to tell earlier. Then okay, we got interrupted. Uh, those bankers, the Medici family, the Fugger, they have experimented it in the West that by using the use religion, but religion became so powerful that they couldn't continue their own. agenda of mind control. Uh, so when they moved into the US, they kicked out. They didn't use religion, so they were only using the engineering, the science.
Right. So modern globalization, which began in the
Mhm,
Renaissance with
mhm,
the banking families and the Renaissance celebrities such as
mhm.
Rembrandt, um, and let me see when I think and Shakespeare was part of that.
Yes.
Queen Elizabeth was part of that, which is
Mhm,
we're seeing now today. The mind control is has two aspects: humanism, which is to claim the university is ethical.
mhm,
I mean, this is what's so crazy. They want to claim the university represents ethics. That's
mhm,
humanism. The
mhm,
second part is secularism, where religion is put as kind of a backstage reality and,
mhm,
quote, science is the truth. Even though the
mhm,
science is controlled by these secretive guilds and is used for mind control, just like during the Roman Catholic Church's Dark Ages, if you
mhm,
disagreed with a bishop, which
mhm,
happened to Mozart, who was part of the Renaissance,
mhm,
you could be blacklisted and die. You could be killed. Today,
mhm,
if you disagree with the mainstream science, you're called ignorant, stupid, religious,
mhm.
because the
Uh,
science, the fraudulent science by these secret societies that are hidden based on opium.
mhm,
Opioids are still being used to kill people
mhm,
and addict. These secret societies want to claim the university, and that's Bill Gates
mhm.
sponsoring universities. That's the Rockefeller sponsoring universities, want to claim they represent truth and ethics.
So, in other words, the Renaissance and colonialism and the Reformation period and the Rebirth period, what was actually the beginning of uh, the secret societies.
The domination, before that, kings and emperors
Mhm,
dominated, and now the guilds of engineers and
mhm,
tradespeople
mhm.
began to dominate.
So
Technology
it was,
played a role. So instead
yes.
of controlling religion,
Mhm.
the the bankers were controlling the university.
So in the beginning, they used religion, but they thought they experimented it, and religion became so powerful that it was out of control. So they moved to the U.S. and they
Well,
didn't.
I wouldn't say
They,
powerful. Religion
mm,
became so tyrannical it began to
yes,
collapse.
yes,
I wouldn't say
and
powerful. Religion
yes,
became so tyrannical
yeah.
and against
Tyrannical,
warning that it was collapsing.
tyrannical is mhm.
So we have the
Tyrannical is a
rise
good
of
word.
so we have the rise of humanism and secularism, largely based on banking interests of secret society.
Mhm. So we have summarized enough in our uh, short video. It was hundreds of years of history, and we covered and we summarized whatever we can. If you have any
Well,
question, leave it in the comment.
yeah, I think what I try to do is present stuff that you can't find.
Yes.
I try to
Uh,
present a point of view that makes sense. I mean, it's an opinion,
yes.
but that you can't read about because you can read about the rest yourself.
Yes, just like you sent me the links, I studied it, and there were many missing links, and you helped me, and thank you for helping me to connect the dots. And if you have any question, leave it in the comment box below. Ed will answer it to you, or I will answer it to you as soon as I can. Thank you, and have a good night.
Okay, bye.
Bye.